Um, Good morning. I'm here, my name is Paul Julian, and I'm here assisted with my partner, Joe Davey. And today is the February 7th, 2023. It's a Tuesday, and we're here to interview veteran Joe Tichich. We're at the Veterans Memorial Center in Merritt Island, Florida. And we had we'd like to thank you again, Joe, for coming and taking your time to let us interview you. You start with, Joe, where were you born?
Minneapolis, Minnesota.
And when?
1954.
1954. And I'll just jump to, based on us discussing what we would talk about, what primary and secondary schools or college did you attend?
I actually attended several schools, but prior to going to the military, I attended Minneapolis West High School. That was in '72. I graduated from there, did absolutely nothing for a year, went to Mankato State College in southern Minnesota, at which time I realized after a year and a half of doing nothing there that it was time for me to go in the Air Force.
Okay.
Actually, when I got out of high school, I actually talked to a recruiter who I look back on it now, and he was an exceptional recruiter. I just didn't realize it at the time. He's the one that sparked my interest in the Air Force. And so it actually took a couple of years for me to decide, maybe I should really do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I went from the state college and went right in the Air Force.
Well, Joe, about what year was that you went in?
I had a delayed enlistment program in December of 1974,
Mm-hmm.
and I went in to basic training in June of '75, so it was like a 6-month thing.
And what boot camp did you go to?
Went to Lackland
Air Force,
Lackland Air Force Base,
okay. And so you really joined because at that point you really thought it was just the best thing you could do.
I joined because I realized, two things. One, I realized what I was not doing, and that was I was not doing something with my life. I mean, in college it was a lot of fun. I really wasn't applying myself one single bit, and I thought, well, this is nuts. I have to do something. When I made the decision to go into the Air Force, I asked, and this comes into play later on, I asked what was the longest technical school, because I wanted a challenge. I didn't want to go in and there were certain things I knew what I did not want to do, and I took the ASVAB and I did very well on it. And it's good to say you did very well on the ASVAB, but the bad thing is that when somebody says you can do anything you want, then you got this huge list of things to decide from, and that's what's pretty tough to do. So I'm not, saying I was great or anything like that. I'm just saying I did very well, and So I asked the recruiter. I said I want to go to the longest technical school that was available, and at that particular time it was computer maintenance and radar maintenance were the longest school, which is why I chose computer maintenance.
Okay.
So that's a long answer, but did that answer that question?
That's what we want. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Now you left from college. You went from there as far as your career. You went from, you didn't feel that college was right for you at the time.
Correct.
And did you have any, a girlfriend or anything like that?
I did. I'm still with her today. I can't get rid of her. No, as a matter of fact, that's kind of that's a quick side story there. We met in college. Our first semester in college, we met, and we actually lived with each other for a while. And she realized, she's actually the one that encouraged me. She said, "You got to do something with your life. Why don't you, you talk about the Air Force. Why don't you go into the Air Force?" And the plan at the time was that she was going to continue on with college, and I was going to go in the Air Force. And after 4 years, she was going to have her degree, and I was going to be done with the Air Force, and we were going to get married then. And after about maybe 2 months before I was going to basic training, she rethought and said, "Forget that. We're getting married, and I'm going with you." And so we got married, and then 2 weeks later, I was gone to boot camp. So I blame it all on her, which is actually, I tell people, the best decision I ever made was marrying my sweetheart. And the second best decision was to go in the Air Force, but she's really the one that nudged me to do that, and it was probably a very good thing for all of us. It turned out to be a great thing, that's for sure.
And as far as the choice of the Air Force, why the Air Force instead of like the Navy or Marine Corps? Or?
Well, that's when I was out of high school, I worked at a gas station that was right across the street from the recruiting station, and this Air Force recruiter came over and get his smokes and whatever. I mean, he'd come over, and I looked at the uniform, and make a long story short, I went and talked to him a couple times. I talked to the Army and I talked to the Navy. Mm-hmm. But I think the thing about the Air Force, I was very interested in the technical schools. I mean, the Navy had the same thing, but I didn't have an interest to be out in the water. I mean, some people have that interest, but it didn't really apply to me. So the Air Force or the Navy, those two things really, the technical schools being so long, mm-hmm. And I thought there must be something to this. So mm-hmm. that was one of the reasons, I guess that was the main reason I chose the Air Force, was because the attraction for the long technical schools are in there.
So it seemed that you thought there must be substantive training. That's why it was integral in your choice between
Absolutely.
the two?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I wanted, for example, I think the tech school that I was interested in was like 9 months long, mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, my gosh, that's almost a half. It's a long school, and I thought there must be a lot of challenges. And also prior to that, the word electronics, I had no idea what that even was. I had no clue what that was. Mm-hmm. You'd say electronic circuitry, and I had no idea what mm-hmm. that even meant. Sure, you turn on a light switch and that's it, but. So that kind of attracted me, and so mm-hmm. that was the Computer Technician Act, especially back then in the 70s. The word computer, whoo boy! If you had computers background, I thought that's got to be something.
Yeah.
So the computer technician, fixing a big computer system was like, boy, I thought this was a great thing to get into.
So, Joe, would you actually do maintenance on mainframes and?
Yes, exactly. Not only the mainframes, but the printers and the disk drives and the tape drives, I mean, all that communication kind of stuff.
And you mentioned the word challenge. Was it a challenge?
It was, I enjoyed the challenge. It was, and there were some people that I work with, they were labeled a technician, but I was gung-ho, man. Yeah. There was a couple of us that, we called ourselves the three musketeers. There was three of us in our maintenance shop. And we would challenge each other. We would say, hey, what happens if we do that? In fact, we'd take what's called a kludge. I don't know if that term means anything to you. It's a little piece of wire. And we would go into the computer system, and it would actually ground out a signal, electronic signal, and it would cause problems. And then one of us would have to go out trying to figure out where the kludge was. I mean, we would challenge each other with that. I mean, we were just so gung-ho about. The other guy said, you guys are all weird, but we just had a ball doing that stuff. We just had a lot of fun.
Do you recall, and during that time, Joe, was it 9 months?
That school, that technical school, what's called basic electronics, was 9 months. Mm-hmm.
And you went on, right after that, you go into something else?
You go to PCS to your first duty station. Okay.
And in the school, though, was there an instructor that you recall, a particular instructor that had impact?
No, I will say this. I mean, that technical schools, they take it from basic electronics. This is how electronics works, and going all the way up into computer systems, how they're designed and whatnot. So it was an excellent school. It's probably a lot of the technical schools at Keesler. They're still excellent. I don't doubt that.
Stop for a few minutes.
I think he's about gone.
Up to you guys.
Hopefully. Okay, so what was your, okay, let's go on before we move out of your basic training and basic technical training. Did you qualify in any particular equipment or systems?
Yes.
What were the?
Well, no, for the basic training, for the basic electronic training, everyone that was going for computer maintenance, there was a lot of different computers in the Air Force. and it's not the same thing as avionics. Avionics is specifically for aircraft, but the land-based computer systems is what I was, the computer maintenance class was for. I didn't know what computer system I was going to be working on at all. Big Air Force said, okay, once you're done. In fact, I was initially scheduled to go to Camp Pendleton in California, but at the last moment they switched me over to Bergstrom in Austin, Texas, working on a air traffic control system, which was called the 407L, which is completely gone now. But it was a mobile air traffic control system for fighters during wartime.
Okay.
Radar was attached to the computer system, and the computer system had scope dopes in it, air traffic controllers.
So when they fly, Joe, this I'm totally unsophisticated. When they fly, did they have that system on the ground would communicate with the fighters as they flew?
They communicate. That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Or not only the fighters, but the AWACS systems. Any flying, any military I should say any aircraft, military aircraft flying in the area, in the war zone, if you will, would communicate with that radar system.
So it was like a really integral to the mission. I mean, you had to have that.
Indeed
Okay.
it was. I
Okay.
mean, otherwise the pilots didn't know where they were going.
Okay. Okay. What was the hardest part of training, Joe? That training, was it making the grade, or what was?
I don't recall anything being real hard on it. I was so absorbed in the technical aspects and what I was learning there. I don't recall anything being really hard.
Okay.
I'm not saying I must have been super smart. It was, I just sucked all that information in. I don't remember anything being difficult. But you got to remember, I followed on and went for an electrical engineering degree. I still have brain damage from that particular thing. But I don't remember the tech school being.
You have and do you have any vivid memories of that school? Like that.
No, I don't, and let me tell you the reason why is because when I got done with my basic electronics school and I went PCS'd over to Bergstrom, I was there for not even a year. And I guess I must have made an impression on the senior NCOs there, because what they did is they sent me back to Keesler for specific training on that particular air traffic control system. Not just in general, but specifically to that air traffic control system.
I see.
And I was the only one in the computer maintenance shop that was selected to go do that, and that was another 5 months of training.
Was that advanced school?
It was
Specialized
advanced and specific to that particular air traffic control system.
Okay. Well, so you, as far as basic training, and then your first technical school, which is now you're in a technical career field.
Yes.
What was the hardest part of making in which you encountered? I think you probably encountered in college some classes that were hard, right? What was the hardest part of making the transition from civilian to military?
Well, that's when I got out of the Air Force. I got out in a program called Palace Front. Now, Palace Front, a lot of people don't even know what that means. It still exists today. Palace Front is a program when you're on active duty and the very next day you're in the Air Force Reserves. You don't have, there's no transition, there's no break in service. You go from active duty to reserves, boom. So I knew, I just had that Air Force desire. I wanted to stay in, but the reason I got out is because I wanted to go to get my electrical engineering degree. Because the interest in computers was so embedded in my brain. I wanted to go and design computer circuitry. That was my goal. The reason I got out of the Air Force is I wanted to do that.
Yeah, thinking about my son, he's also technically minded, and he is also like you. You wanted to work with the hardware. You didn't necessarily want to program. You want to.
Yeah, I had no interest in doing software at all, which was kind of it was a good thing and a bad thing. At the particular time, it sounded like a good thing, but you look forward and everything's software now.
Right.
But I had no interest in doing the software.
Right.
I did programming on that air traffic control system. I did some of that thing, but that wasn't the main purpose.
You said another way, not that I understand this, Joe, but you have to understand the software before you understand the circuitry, and you have to understand, you have to understand both in order to, you have to, the whole essence of the system you have to understand. You can't just understand the hardware, you have to understand the,
Well, in my instance, I was specific on designing computer circuitry. And I did that after, after I got out of college. I did that for a little bit, not very long. But it's a software, of course, they got to work together. But
right, that's what
the hardware design and the software design are completely different.
Okay.
But so I was more focused on the hardware
Okay.
design.
Okay. And was there an easier part of making that transition from civilian to military? Was there?
No, because it wasn't difficult for me because I knew what I wanted to do. I had my 10-year plan out there. I was going to get out. I was going to get my engineering degree, and then I was going to maybe go back into the Air Force, which I was in. For 1 year, I was in ROTC at the University of Minnesota because I had intentions to go back.
Yeah.
Back into the military, the Air Force. That was my intent. Things didn't work out. That's another story, but things didn't work out, so I didn't end up doing that.
So you made it through, what did you call that type of school when you went for a specific aircraft system?
It was a school that was dedicated specifically for that air traffic control system. For example, the system that I was working on was called the 407L system. This was a 407L school, and nobody else went to that. Only individuals that were chosen. In fact, I think my class was only 10 people from 10 different locations in the world that they were selected by their shop to come to that school. And that was pretty intense. It was intense in long hours, but it was well worth it. So
Again, it gets back to that thing, you're challenged in an area you really like.
yeah, when can I tell a side story here?
Do anything you want to.
The printer on this,
And it's a humorous event, right?
It's a humorous. It's also an embarrassing event for me. So the computer system that we had, there was what was called a Kleinschmidt printer, and it was one of these things that had paper, and the hammer would smack on, and the actual letter typeset would be behind the paper, and the hammer would hit the paper, and the typeset would be a reflection of the letter on that paper. And back in the day, when I say back in the day, maybe in the 50s or 60s when this thing was developed, it worked pretty good. Well, that thing to try and figure out and actually tweak. I call it tweaking to get that print perfect. Is very, very difficult on this printer. And while I was gone, a guy named Dan Provincio, I still remember his name. While I was gone, he spent months tweaking that thing, and he had that thing looking almost perfect. And I came back from tech school, and I said, I'm the guy now because I can perfect. And I blah blah blah. I said, Dan, let's go out there and try and tweak it so it's perfect, not almost perfect, but perfect. And I screwed that thing up so bad. I never did get it back to normal, and it stayed that way until I left.
Kind of like a humbling experience.
And I actually, this is a true story. About maybe 20 years after I got out of active duty, I hunted down Dan Provincio and I called him up. And he not only remembered me, and he said, I never have forgiven you for trying to tell me to go out and fix that printer. But anyway, that's a kind of crazy story.
It's funny. It's funny. So you finished tech school,
Yeah.
and then where did you go then?
I finished tech school. I went back to Bergstrom Air Force Base, and I put in my enlistment was completed at Bergstrom.
They didn't at that time, Joe? They didn't require you to spend extra time for the school?
No, not at all. Which is kind of surprising to me because I spent almost a year and a half doing nothing but tech school, and I spent 2.5 years on active duty.
Yeah.
So almost half my time was at tech school, which is, I thought that was pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive. And did you, if you decided to do nothing else in your life, would that have qualified you to go in civilian society to do a job?
A similar job like that?
Did they have a counterpart?
Yeah, many companies.
So
that
it
control
trained
data.
you up. It trained you up to.
Yeah, indeed. But that wasn't my ambition. I mean, I wanted to be an engineer, and I wanted to designing computer circuitry from scratch.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a repairman, although I really enjoyed doing that work. As a matter of fact, when I got out of while I was going to tech school, I worked part-time at Control Data as a technician, computer technician, on some of their big mainframe computers. I did that for a while.
They were big back in the day.
Huge. I mean, size of this wall.
Yeah.
But they certainly don't have that now.
Yeah.
Well, as a matter of fact, they still have that now.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Cray computers and some of the huge supercomputers. Yeah. I mean, they're big.
Universities, yeah.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. And that's what this computer system that I was working on. That was.
So that would have you could have did nothing else if you didn't want to mess with the military anymore. You could have just went out. And
Indeed, I could, but I
made
had
a decent living.
I had no intentions.
Made a
of doing
decent
that.
living, Joe.
Indeed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, I was in the Air Force Reserve, so once a month I went to the Air Force
Yeah.
unit, and I did that thing. And I never lost interest in the Air Force. I always wanted to keep associated with the Air Force, whether it was the reserves. Later on, I went to the Guard. I was in ROTC. Did the Air Force ROTC. I always had that interest, and even to this day, that's why I'm still associated with the military. I still volunteer to different locations. I still have that interest.
Commander at a.
Yeah. Well, not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So you went into the reserve. So Bergstrom, and where is that? Texas.
Austin, Texas.
Austin.
It's not the base is no longer there.
Okay. But it was in Austin.
Austin,
okay.
Texas.
So you not was it a long after when you got back from tech school that you got out?
So I got I think maybe not even a couple of years after I got out, and I knew I was going to get out because again I was very pleased with what I did. In fact, I got an Air Force Commendation Medal for the work that I did, which for an E4 that was
pretty good.
That was pretty uncommon.
Yeah.
Myself and one of the other individuals, what I call the Three Musketeers. We were the only ones that received that commendation. But it wasn't common to have an E4 get that, but both of us got that.
And so you went from the duty in Bergstrom, and then you went to the reserves.
In the reserve.
What did you do in the reserves? Did you say that you still had a interest in being back in the
Yes,
Air
I did.
Force?
When I got out of the Air Force, I went to Minnesota, back to Minnesota. I didn't want to go back to Minnesota. That woman that I lived with, she said, "We're going back to Minnesota because the family's there." That's the reason I don't want to go back there. But she prevailed, and so we went back there, and I was accepted at the school there.
At the college?
At the college.
What was it, Minnesota?
University of Minnesota. The Institute of Technology. So I tell people I went to MIT, which is really Minnesota Institute of Technology, but I went to MIT. Whoopee!
And did you immediately, Joe, go into engineering then, huh?
Immediately.
Immediately.
I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't want anything else. But let me tell you what I did in the Air Force Reserve. You asked a question.
Yeah.
You asked a question of what did I do in the Air Force Reserve. I was a teletype, that same teletype story I told you. I was a teletype maintenance guy, similar to that piece of junk that we had when I was on active duty, which was, I mean, it was a job in that unit that needed to have someone there. There were only two of us that were in there.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the other guy that was working as a teletype maintenance was an engineer for 3M. So he also, just by the fact of chatting with him, he was an engineer at 3M, a full-blown electrical engineer, but he wanted to be a technician during the reserves during that. So that was another reason that really fed my interest in becoming an electrical engineer, was because of that guy.
And how long did it take you to finish up your degree?
A little over 4 years.
4 years,
Yeah.
and then you saying this fellow reservist, he kind of inspired you then, huh?
He did.
Yeah.
He did. Yeah, I never told him that. I wouldn't have told him. I hope he never sees this.
So when you got your my son's electrical engineer too, but you got your degree.
Yeah.
And then what next? Did you think about, hey, I'm just going to go see if I can get on with 3M?
Well, actually, when I got my degree, first of all, I need to mention this. While I was in the Air Force Reserves, I was promoted up to an E6 tech sergeant. I was eligible to become an E7, a master sergeant, which I really thought that'd be kind of a neat thing to do. I never even thought about being an officer at this particular time in my career. But I wanted to be promoted, and the unit that I was in, it was limited to the number of people that could get promoted. That's not personality conflict, it's just that the slots weren't there.
Right.
So I found an Air National Guard unit across the flight line from the Air Force Reserve unit that had a teletype NCO E7 position that was available. So I took that. I jumped from not only one unit to the other, I jumped from the Air Force Reserve to the Air National Guard, Minnesota Air National Guard. It's completely different worlds, completely different. Into a different unit, and I was in that slot. I couldn't get promoted because they didn't have enough time and grade.
Yeah, Joe, is it analogous to being, say, you're in the Navy and you jump to the Coast Guard? Same deal. It's very much different.
That's a real drastic thing because they're completely different services. I mean, this is the same service as different branches.
Oh, okay.
No, a different. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
Okay.
No, a brand. Well, whatever. Because in the Air Force, you've got three different different branches: active, reserves, and the Guard. They're all completely different. They're all great.
But they're under the Air Force.
They're all within
the
umbrella of the Air Force.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a little bit different than the Guard and the Navy type of thing. I mean, the Coast Guard and the Navy.
Yeah.
Because they're completely separate branches. Completely. So anyway, I went to the Guard, and I did my weekends with the Guard, waiting until I could get enough time to get promoted to E7. I mean, that's what I really wanted to do.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I was done with college, and I got a job.
What college?
University of Minnesota.
Done with college. Okay.
I was done with college.
Yeah.
And I got a job with Unisys, well, actually a Sperry. At the time it was called Sperry. Now it's called Unisys. A lot of people don't even know if it even exists. But at the time, they were a pretty big company. Sperry was bought out by Burroughs, which became Unisys, and I was there at the time. And so I was an electrical engineer. I was in a section that was not initial design of computer systems, but if a computer system didn't work, they would send it to me, and I would evaluate
systems analysis.
Well, it was not only system analysis, but I redesigned the system so it did work. The computer circuitry, so it did work.
Yeah.
So I did that. There was well, it's not there now, but there was an air traffic control system in I think it was Taiwan that they wanted to expand their capability there, and in order to do that, it had to be redesigned. So I was directly involved with that.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple other things that I was involved with electrical engineering wise.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of fun in itself. But when Burroughs bought out Sperry and became Unisys, I don't know if you're familiar with whenever a company buys out another, there's somebody going to get kicked out.
Right, right.
So I say, well, I did get laid off. And in 89 or 90, I think I got laid off, which turned out to be, I sit there and say old sob story for me.
A blessing in disguise.
It was the best thing that ever happened to me. I enjoyed what I was doing, and I completely understood why, people, in fact, where I was working was an air traffic control system of Unisys. That's where I was, which directly fell into what I was doing on active duties, just on the civilian side of the house there. But when I got laid off, I thought, geez, this is really a horrible thing. Wham, poor me. Mm-hmm. Well, what had happened just prior to that is Unisys was opening up a plant in Pueblo, Colorado. Mm-hmm. And they asked me if I wanted to be in charge of the engineering manufacturing area at this brand new plant that they were building. And I thought that'd be kind of fun. So I accepted that position. And I almost moved down to Pueblo. And one thing that I did was that I got out of the Guard. Mm-hmm. I got out of the Guard.
Got out of the Guard. You made a decision. This is it for.
Not permanently. I actually looked for a unit down in Colorado that I was going to join. Mm-hmm. But the reason I didn't move right away is because I couldn't sell my house. Mm-hmm. So, and I wanted to get out of the Guard because I didn't want that to interfere. Because when I got that house sold, I wanted to be down there and accepted into that other Guard unit. I mean, everything was all greased and ready to go. Well, as it turns out, the plant down in Pueblo never materialized. It never came to fruition. And I thought, well, geez, what do I do now? And I thought, I got to go back, and, back into my old position in the civilian world and back into the guard unit, take my house off the market, and so I did that. When I went back to the guard unit, the guard recruiter asked me, he said, you've got an electrical engineering degree, right? And I said, well, yeah. He said, well, there's an opening in civil engineering on the base as a lieutenant in the officer world. And I really never thought about that. And I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I gave up my E7 position in the guard, and then I went and became a brand new butter bar in the civil engineering unit, which by the way, when anybody that knows anything about enlisted or being a Mustang, when you go from being an E7 or an E7 promotable type of guy, and all of a sudden you're an O1, it's like taking 50 steps backwards, and you're really nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
When you're an O1 in that sense, so here I am, a 30-some-year-old O1, and so it was an interesting situation, but I was appreciative.
Did they, Joe? Did they send you what I heard is called knife and fork school?
No,
No.
I didn't do that.
You know what I'm talking about? Just
I do, and I know
act
exactly.
like an officer.
I know exactly what you're talking about. No, it was just like, okay, now you're an officer.
Yeah, you get your uniforms and.
Well, no, let me rephrase my statement. I didn't go to knife and fork school, but I did go to the guards version of an officer school, which was a great school. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But that was 6 weeks. That was 6 weeks long. To me, it was a piece of cake, because having been in active duty, boot camp, or guys in your face yelling at you and stuff like that, and these guys were sitting there trying to yell at these 30-year-old guys, and I'm sitting there laughing, saying, I know what you're doing, I'll play your little game, but some of these other guys are freaking out because they'd never been in the military. Can I tell a side story here?
You can tell all the side stories you want, Joe.
Chief Cherry.
Chief Cherry.
It's funny how you remember some of these names of people that did things to you when you were way back when. Chief Cherry was a Chief Master Sergeant, E9, in charge of the instruction for this officer school. I mean, there was a lot of other people, but he came into my room, and my roommate and I are standing at attention, and he was doing inspections on the closet and the wardroom type of thing. And he opened up my closet, and he asked me right away, he said, you want to give me 5 or 20 push-ups right now, or do you want to give me 5 for every one of these inspections? You know what I'm talking about, those little inspection sticker things?
Gigs? Every gig, the thing.
Yeah, he said, you want to give me 5 for every gig, or do you want to give me 20 right now? I said, heck, I checked all that stuff. I'll go for the 5. I ended up doing 60 push-ups, and I swear to this day he planted those things just because I was cocky enough to say, yeah, I'll do blah blah blah. And I asked him about that years later, and he said, no, he said, I never did that. I think I pulled my leg. But anyway, so officer school in the guard wasn't a piece of cake. I mean, it was physically demanding, and you did that game, you got through that thing. Not a real problem for me. It was my roommate. My roommate and I, because he was also
academics was a piece of cake.
No,
but maybe you had to do some physical things.
Yeah, it was pretty easy. Yeah. So. But there were individuals that
had a hard time.
Not only had a hard time, they just said, "I can't take this," and they just quit. Mm-hmm. They just voluntarily got out, which I think they were foolish for that.
Yeah.
But my roommate and I were prior enlisted as well, so I mean, we told stories.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. So it was pretty easy. Yeah. So I got out of officer school and then went back to the unit, civil engineering unit back in Minnesota. And I was there and working at Unisys at that time. And when I got laid off, I mean, I was at the civil engineering unit as a weekender. So when I got laid off, I went back to the unit on the base there, and they said, we have an opportunity here. You can work here full time. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's the craziest thing I ever thought. Well, I didn't realize that I took that opportunity, and I'd be with the Guard for the next 20 years,
and that's
full time.
And that's what you did.
And that's exactly what I did. So I was a full time Air National Guard, and when I tell people I was an Air National Guard, the first thing they realize or think about, it's not their fault, they just don't know, is, weekend warrior. Well, I was not a weekend warrior because there's a small staff, maybe 5 to 10% of the total amount of people in the
Totally.
guard unit are full-time people.
5 to 10?
Yeah, it's not very small, it's not very, very large at all. So I was in that group there.
Well, so about what time, what year was this, Joe, when we?
So that was 86, I got commissioned. About 90, I got laid off, so there was 4 years I was working for Unisys. And from 90 up until 2010, I was in the Guard
And
at that time, as a
Joe,
commissioned officer.
So were you impacted like the rest of the, all but I think this, with all but the Navy, and maybe to a lesser extent the Air Force, all had scheduled rotations overseas during the War on Terror and all that. You were, being a full-time Guard member, you were involved in that.
No,
You weren't
no.
activated?
In my position, I understand exactly what you're saying. In the Air National Guard world, there are certain people that do get activated, especially the flying side of the house for the Air National Guard. Yeah, they got activated. I know several people that were over in Afghanistan flying many times over the year. 3 or 4 times during the year they'd go for a month or two. But I was not the position that I was in.
Engineering was not in that.
That was not
Okay.
in fact, I left that civil engineering position when I actually I went back to the unit that I was a master sergeant in. I went back to that unit. I was there for 4 years
You were as an officer?
as an officer.
Okay.
So I was in charge of a lot different, not teletype maintenance anymore. I was actually in charge of finding training opportunities for everybody in the communication unit.
Okay. So
Throughout
it was
the-
basic
throughout the world.
communications then, yeah.
Yeah,
And
communication.
then over that 20 years, and during that 20 years though, you went back to the Air Force, right? The Air Force Reserve?
No,
No, you went back to the Air Force?
No, I went from active duty to the Air Force Reserve for about 7 years, and then I went to the Guard, and I spent the rest of my time in the Guard.
Okay.
I was activated. I voluntarily
Okay.
wanted to be activated.
Did you do it like just once or multiple times?
No, multiple times.
And then so why don't you tell me, Joe, as far as like about some of those times that you were, that you go ahead and volunteered. I mean,
Okay. Well, let me say this: when I was in the communications unit, I was transferred, not on my own, but I was transferred down to state headquarters, is what it's called. So I was headquarters for the Minnesota Air National Guard. And so the Guard units in the state report to the headquarters, and that's where I was transferred down to, which turned out to be a very good thing for me. I didn't realize at the time. It turned out to be a pretty good thing. And I realized towards the end of my career that, I wanted to deploy. I wanted to be involved with what was going on, like the flyboys. I wanted to do something to be able to tell people, I was in the military for some odd years, but I never went over and
Right.
did anything.
Participated,
I just want to do that. So I talked to my 06 boss, which was an Army boss at the time, and I explained to him what I wanted to do, and he was fully understanding and supportive of the whole thing, which I really am thankful for.
06, is that like a general?
Colonel.
Oh, colonel, okay.
Colonel, yeah. And he said, yeah, go ahead and do what you need to do. So the first deployment I went was over to Qatar, and I was in charge of communication.
QATAR?
QATAR, LUD, and it's still there today.
What year was that, Joe, real quick?
That was, now you got me going. Glad I brought my piece of paper.
Okay.
That was 2007.
2007.
2007 was the first time I went over there. So I was only over there for maybe 6 months. 6 months. And that was an experience in itself. I mean, that was the first time I'd been over in the war zone, the AOR.
Was it, did you get your mission done? Did you feel that?
Well, I was in a position that was a rotating position. In other words, I was there for 6 months. Somebody else came in there for 6 months. So it went on for years.
And what did it support?
it supported the communication capability in the AOR. When I say communication capability, I'm talking about air traffic control systems, landing systems, radio communication, fiber optic installation at certain bases, telephone communication, radio communication, all those things. I had teams where I was over there. I was in charge of like 10 teams scattered all around, some in Afghanistan, some in Iraq, some in Qatar, they were scattered everywhere. But they reported to me, and I reported to my boss that was in Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. So that's how that communicated. But it was all communication gear. So I was in charge of making sure that they were proceeding like they were supposed to, or if they need to be relocated, all these different types of things. But I was in charge of all of those 10 teams, and I had a staff of maybe 5 people that were with me in Qatar. But that's where we were stationed. That's where we were based. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I left there and went back to the States. Went back to my old job in the States, which by the way, I was an IT manager, the Minnesota National Guard, the computer systems throughout the state. My boss he was the IT big shot, but I was his right hand man. And this comes into play later on. So I got back, and then I asked, I had that deployment stink, as a general once told me. He said, go over there and get your deployment stink on you. And I went and got that, and I thought, I can't wait to go back. I'm going to go back and do that again. That was a lot of fun.
Did you go back?
So I had another opportunity, and he said, well, you want to go back, and it's a completely different position, but you're back in the Middle East, and what I was at that time had absolutely nothing to do with my previous jobs, nothing. But I was the camp commander of an army camp at Ali Al Salim in Kuwait. And you think about that, and you think, why the heck you got an Air Force guy? One of the reasons I was told is because the Army was so spread thin, deploying people and all the different actions that they were in. They didn't have enough people to take care of this camp.
Yep.
And this camp is what I call the Greyhound bus station. That's what I call it. People were not actually working there. They were staging there. They were transients, all transients, going in and out of that place all the time. So that's what it was. It was just a big tent city and that type of thing. But it still had to be manned. So I had a staff of maybe 20 Air Force members, and the staff that I was with, we were the last of the Air Force people. There had been maybe 6 contingents of Air Force people. So I was the last one, and I folded the flag, the detachment flag for that particular camp, and then the Army took it over from there, and they're probably still there now.
What year was that about?
That was 2008, 2009, somewhere around there.
Okay. And anything really sticks in your mind about that particular experience?
One thing that comes into my mind right away is, and this is how, in my mind, how it's supposed to work. When you have an E9 and a first sergeant, okay, we all know what first sergeants are, okay, first sergeant. When you have an E9 first sergeant, in my mind, you pay attention to that guy. You respect what he has to say. So although I was the commander of the camp and in charge of all this staff, about 2 or 3 days after I got there, he said, and he had been there like 4 months prior to me being there. He said, Colonel, he said, why don't you go sit in your office and I'll tell you when I need you to do something. And I said, okay, Chief, that sounds like a good plan to me. And that's one of the easiest jobs I ever had in my entire career.
And had no problems with it.
None whatsoever, because he was taking care of this. Colonel, you need to go make a presentation, or Colonel, you need to go meet with the general. Colonel, you got to. I said,
Take charge,
Chief,
guy. Squared away.
this guy had it all under control. And for me to walk in and say, "Hey, we're going to change," out of my mind. No way.
That's the benefit of being a Mustang, right?
Well, that's exactly
and
true.
judging character. That they
This
could
guy was he weighed maybe 130 pounds, and he smoked like 2 packs of cigarettes a day, ran 5 miles a day, and he was one of these guys. This is what we're going to do. And I said, okay,
Let's get
Chief.
it done.
I mean, he was a diamond wearing, and in the Air Force this means something. So people watching this, he was a diamond wearing first sergeant E9, Now, in the active duty Air Force, there's less than 20 of them that exist throughout the whole Air Force system. He was one of 20. And he didn't get to be that way because he's, didn't have his stuff together. He had it all figured out.
Yeah, yeah.
And when he told me to go sit in my office, I kind of put my tail between my legs. Okay, Chief, whatever you want me to do.
So how many months was that, or years?
That was a little less shy of 5 months.
5 months. Okay, you went back and then went back to your unit.
I went back to Minnesota. And I went back, and again, I wanted to go out and do something else. So this time, I got a job in the United States. I was at Fort Bragg. I was at Fort Hood. A lot of different locations, Army locations. And I was in charge of the Air Force members going through Army training before they went to Afghanistan to go to an actual war zone. Because the Air Force didn't really have any combat training like that. The Army had all that kind of stuff.
That's right.
But the Air Force needed an Air Force liaison.
Indoctrination.
Then that's what I was to keep the Army off the airmen's, trying to think that they were soldiers.
Right.
So I was that.
Kind of like a liaison.
That's exactly what it was. It was liaison. So I did that at several different locations. I did that for about a year and a half.
Okay.
In different locations throughout.
At this time, are we in Afghanistan mainly, or Iraq still?
Both.
Both. Okay.
These individuals that were going through combat
both.
training, they were going anywhere there was combat,
Okay.
and they were Air Force members actually going through combat training. So there was a lot of different purposes for where they ended up in the AOR.
So this is what year is this now, Joe?
So this was maybe 08, 09, 010, something like that.
Okay.
I should say up to 10, so maybe January 10, because shortly after there, I went back to Minnesota, and once again, as I got one last shot, let me do something, and this time I was where I was getting these assignments was coming out of Randolph Air Force Base, because I had a point of contact there that knew of all these opportunities and vacancies. So I called him up and said, "Where can I go now?" And he said, "Well, how about Guantanamo Bay, Cuba?" And I said, "Well, okay." I said, "What am I going to do there?" He said, "Well, you're going to be the IT director at Guantanamo Bay, at the prison in Guantanamo Bay." And I thought, sign me up. So boom, off I went. So I was down there for 5 or 6 months.
This is Joe. Tell me, this is terrorist, jail terrorist, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
So when you hear about the prison down there, of course, when I went down there, there was about 160 prisoners down there at the time. There was many more than that, but at one time, a lot less than there is now.
Yeah.
But I was in charge of the IT contingent, which was radio, telephone, fiber optic, satellite communication, anything to do with communication. I was the IT director for that.
Wow.
So I had 160 individuals working for me, of which there was probably 80 civilian contractors that were down there permanent, really. And the other contingent were like myself. They were National Guard members or active duty.
How did you
people.
find that, Joe?
Through my point.
How did you find that duty? I mean, how did it feel? What did you?
Oh, how did I find it?
Yeah.
It was. I look back on it, because the individual that was before me had no IT experience, and I could tell when I got there, because people were trying to talk to me. Being an IT manager, when you have geeks talking to you, they might try and BS you with the gizmajigger on the flong dinger. And if you don't know that they're BSing you, you could just get sucked into what they're saying. But if you know they're BSing you, you can tell them, stop that, don't do that. This is the job we need to do. And that worked out for me, being an IT manager in Minnesota. When I got there, I could tell right away, and I told the guy, stop doing that. I don't want to hear this technical junk. This is what we got to do. And so I found it challenging, because the person before me had no experience whatsoever. The other challenge that I had, and you'll respect this, the other challenge I had for the first time in my entire career, I had a Navy boss, a Navy captain boss. And let me tell you something, Navy works completely different than the Air Force. And there was many times I had friction and conflict. And it wasn't because I didn't like the Navy. It's that the way that they conducted things was completely different than how I was used to. And I worked with the Army as well, but they all had different ways of doing things. And that was hard for me to try to adjust to that.
Did it end up kind of putting a pall over the whole duty?
No, just me personally.
Yeah, but it was so it made it less. It made it more difficult to get into the really feel secure and get really into the assignment, right?
The assignment itself, without the dealings of the Navy ways, you know, as far as the technical guys, that was not a problem at all. That was easy. It was just getting used to how the Navy operated. That was
the procedures.
It was tough.
Yeah,
it was real tough.
How many months?
I was down there, I think, a little less than 6 months.
6 months, yeah.
Down there.
And so you finished that, Joe?
I finished that, went back to Minnesota, and I said, you know, that's enough. I woke up one day and I realized, you know, after 30 some odd years wearing the uniform, and I woke up one day and I said, you know, I remember when I was an enlisted guy or a junior ranking officer, and I said, I'm looking at those old geezers, and I thought, why don't you guys move out or retire? Get out of my way, because I want to move up.
Right.
And I looked in the mirror one day and I said, you know, you've been doing this for 30 years. Maybe it's time for you to say goodbye, which I did, and I never regretted that at all.
Okay.
And during that time, you know, my wife and I were thinking about moving down here to Florida from Minnesota, so it kind of worked out well. So I got out of that and came down here.
During your service, did you make a lot of friendships and camaraderie with?
Well, sure did. I mean, anybody that says that they don't do that, well, sure, but I keep in touch with very few people back in Minnesota. It's not that I don't like them.
But you'd establish yourself down here, right?
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed. There's a lot of people that I know and have a great time working with down here.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
January, the specific date, no. It's January of 2010. I know that was the last day.
And where were you when the service ended? Right
Back in Minnesota.
And did it have any effect on you? Was it a big deal? Since you said this is it for what I did?
No. I mean that's. I mean it was I saluted smartly and walked out the door. Said thanks for an incredible career and a incredible time, and gee, I was just super thankful. And I can't say enough good things about not only just the Air Force, but all the military in itself. 'Cause, you know, I tell people that the military is a place where you have the opportunity to prove yourself. In the civilian world, you have to prove yourself to be given the opportunity. So it's a completely different
I like that.
mindset.
I like that analogy.
It's true. It really is, and
Good
it's a great thing because even today, I'm sure it's the case for individuals. You give them an opportunity to do something, man, that they're going to either flop in their face, which happens once in a while,
Or they'll get it done.
But more than often, they're going to get things done.
And this is kind of probably could have asked you this earlier, Joe. So, looking at through all this over 30 years, did it change you? Before you went in, I know this goes back to quite a few years. Based on what you were before you went through the service, which is your career, can you think of how it changed you from how you were before?
Before I went in, before being a drunk running around all daggone weekend doing nothing but drinking and chasing women.
Yeah.
No, I can't. I'm still that way. No, that's anybody that says they don't get changed by that kind of an experience it's made me realize, number one is to have an opportunity to what I call being a tiny little sliver in the baseball bat of the defense for this country. What an opportunity. And anybody that doesn't appreciate what they have in this country should go overseas, spend some time overseas, and find out when you come back home, well, this is a pretty darn good country. We've got our problems, there's no question about that, but and to be able to be part of that, again, the defense of the country is what an opportunity, what a privilege.
Joe, compared to the way you were before, and then over the 30 years, did your service affect the way you relate to others?
Indeed, it did. Especially, well, you know, being an officer is, I mean, you have to
You have to lead.
you have to lead. I mean, you can tell people what to do.
Mhm.
That's not necessarily a good way to, you can be domineering and you can be a dictator, and that's certainly one way to do it, but, and there are a lot of people that do think that's what they have to do, and, you know, to convince people to do things or more or less make it think it's their idea, and they take off with it.
To get them to buy in.
To buy in, yeah, to buy in, but you know, to get in the long range, the mission, to get that done. There's a lot of ways to get a mission done. Get over there, bam, and do that. And, you know, that's one way to do it.
Or else.
Yeah, or else. I mean, but when you have people that are just gung ho, and most people are, they want to do a good job. They don't want to sit around on their butts doing it. They want to do a good job. And to encourage them to get there, and more importantly, one thing that I did when I was an officer, I like to think that I provided the enlisted force the support and whatever they needed, the supplies, you know, their money or whatever.
Resources.
Resources, exactly, to get that done, and I had that capability to provide that to them. They wanted to do it. They just needed the tools. They needed those things.
And I know.
Does that make sense? Am I
It
blabbing
does
here or
make
what?
very much sense, Joe. And I know that you've been involved with the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Any other organizations, veteran organizations?
Sure. I got my hat.
USO.
I belong to the USO.
Okay.
I love the USO.
He uses props this way.
I was just out at the Coast Guard station just yesterday wearing that hat. I belong to this Military Officers Association. I do that.
Very important to your this county.
Well, it's amazing what this chapter is doing, and you know, I wanted, when I got out, finally retired, I knew I wasn't going to sit around and go fishing every day. A lot of guys do that.
Yeah.
I didn't want to do that. I wanted to get involved, and I've got my VFW that I'm involved with. And I was, for a while there, I was the retiree director of the retiree office out of Patrick. I stopped doing that after about 8 years. I mean, that was enough.
Okay.
For somebody else to have a chance. But I have that still, and probably until the day I die. I mean, I'm still going to have that desire and passion to do something with veterans of the military. You know, it's always going to be there.
All right. So, like big picture, a few more. How has the military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
War is an ugly thing. It really is. I mean, it's a necessary thing. It's sad to say, it will never go away. That need will never go away. As long as this country, you know, is any country. I mean, they always have enemies, and they're going to try and do bad things to you. 9/11 was a perfect example of that. And if you don't have that strong fence around, or that deterrent, if you don't have that strong thing, then it's been proven over the many centuries. If you don't have that strong military in our case, if you don't have it, you're not going to last long. It's sad to say, but that's just human nature. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
How am I doing here?
You're doing
am I
good.
doing all right?
You're doing good, Joe.
Got a grade on
That's
this?
a great interview.
Great
One of the
interview.
best ones.
Do I get free lunch after this?
you got it, Joe. Any message you'd like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview? Anything?
Well, there are people that, in my mind, that don't have no desire to be in the military, and I say, good for you. If you don't have that interest, if you don't have that passion, don't come in the military. It doesn't mean you're not dedicated or loyal to the country. That doesn't mean that. It's like me saying, I want to be a football player. I want to be in politics. I don't want to do that. I have no desire to do that. People that have an interest to be in the military, if you have any type of a sliver of an interest to do that, give it a shot. You may not like it. Mm-hmm. After 4 years, you might say, God, I'm getting the heck out of here. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people that do that. Mm-hmm. But at least try it, because just having that experience, whether it's 4 years or 30 years, that experience was something that you can never get anywhere else. That's the only place you can get it. You might say, well, I can go to a civilian company. No, it's different. Because the military does things, not good or bad, it just does things different. And they challenge you to see how far your capabilities are. That's what I think.
Thanks, Joe.
Does that answer?
Oh, yes, sir. And what do you wish more people knew about veterans?
Boy, that's a tough one. What do you wish people knew more about veterans? What do you wish? Rephrase that.
I mean, if you being a veteran and you being amongst veterans now, is there anything that you feel like is maybe a misconception that people may have about veterans? Or do they give veterans enough, the average person give veterans enough credit? Or
I think, after 9/11 changed everything. I remember, as I mentioned, I wore the uniform for a long, long time. And I'd go to work in my uniform. And after 9/11, people actually started coming up to me and saying, "No, thanks for your service," buying me free coffee and buying me a breakfast here and there. I thought, I haven't changed any. I'm just the same old me. But the public perception about the military, and thus veterans as well, changed with 9/11. It's sad to say that's what it took to make the public look there and say, "Oh, you guys have always been there." But now I really recognize it.
Joe, from a low of Vietnam to where we're at today.
Oh, big time! Holy cow! I mean, even the Vietnam veterans now, I think a lot of the civilian population no longer look at them and say, "You're baby killers." They're not looking at them anymore that way. I like to think that's the case anyway.
Yes, sir. And so the last question, Joe.
Boy, it's about time.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we have not covered? As far as pertaining to your service to our country, to veterans, to anything?
I consider myself extremely fortunate to have the opportunity to be in the military. I mean, I really do think it's. I don't want to say I'm lucky. I was just glad I was given that opportunity. So I go back to being when I was in the college first time or second time, whatever it was, and I never realized when I put up my hand and said, "Yeah, I'll go do that," that I would, for the next 30 years, I would be changing a lot of the ways that I thought. And
changing a lot of as far as yourself.
The opportunities that I had to be an officer, and being able to lead individuals and doing a function, for example, like GTMO and the IT thing down there, or being overseas and doing, but quite an opportunity. So I mean, I'm just thankful that I had that chance.
Thank you, Joe.
And if anybody else, that's watching this thing, if some of the younger folks, if you ever wonder about what it's like, give it a chance. You might be surprised at what you can do.
Thank you very much, Joe.
Did I do okay?
Yes, sir. And on behalf of myself and Joe, Davey, we'd like to thank you for allowing us to interview.
Well, thank you for doing this. Then thanks for going through this. I'm sure it's a lot of interesting stuff at times. Couldn't do it without you guys.
Thank you.
So,